Hi everyone. So we're going to continue with our topic under the functional organizations of the nervous system. So this is going to be the second part, and in this part we're going to talk about reflexes. So as usual, this is the learning outcome. So in this part we're going to talk about reflex arc. We're going to see the different classifications of reflexes and also see all the steps in the stretch reflex. Okay, let's talk about the component of reflex arc. And in this arc, we have 5 essential components. So number 1 is receptor. So receptor is either a specialized cells or the dendrites of a sensory neurons. And receptors are very sensitive to physical or chemical changes in the body or changes in the environment. Next one, we have sensory neuron. So sensory neuron carries the information come from the receptor, and then it will transfer it into the integration center. So in the integration center, the information received will be processed, and then will decide on what are the response. So after that, the information will be passed over to the motor neurons, and lastly to the effector organ. Okay, so the effector organ will receive the information from the motor neuron and will show the appropriate response. Okay, now let's see this picture. Okay, this picture talk about the components of the reflex arc. Okay, in this picture you can see that this person touching a very hot pan. So what happens? The receptor such as heat and pain is being activated. Okay, and then this causing the information to be sending over to the spinal cord through the sensory neuron. So and then once it's arrived here in the spinal cord, okay, the stimulus will be processed and decide on what are the response. So after that, okay, the information will be sent to the motor neuron and then lastly to the effector organ. So in this part, okay, the effector, which is the muscle in the arm, is going to contract and causing this hand to be moving away from the hot pan. So next is the classifications of reflexes. So neural reflexes can be classified according to their development, okay, according to the natures of the resulting motor response. Also can be classified based on the complexity of the neural circuit involved, and also can be classified based on the side of information processing. So we're going to talk about all of this, okay, a little bit further in the next slides. Okay, so the first one is the development of reflex. So there are 2 types. So number 1 is the inborn or innate reflex. So this is involve a rapid, involuntary and predictable motor response. Okay, for example, like touching a hot pot, just like what we discussed earlier. So the inborn reflex is very important for us because of this reflex, okay, we don't have to think about all the little detail on how to staying intact and to stay alive. Okay, through this inborn reflex, okay, it helps us to maintain our posture, okay, to avoid any pain and control the visceral activities. So the second type is the learned or acquired reflex. So in this type of reflex is required practice and repetition. For example, like how to drive a car. So in order to be good at driving, okay, you need a constant practice and repetitions to be good at it. Next is the classifications based on the motor response. So reflexes are classified functionally as, first one as a somatic reflexes. Why it called somatic reflexes? Because this type of reflex activate skeletal muscle. And the second one is the autonomic or visceral reflexes. Okay, in this reflexes, this activate visceral effector. Okay, in this picture, I hope you can see this picture. Okay, that the somatic reflex, okay, the first one up here, okay, the somatic reflex occurs in the skeletal muscle. So this reflex involves the skeletal muscle contraction in response to a stimuli. So the spinal cord here is the part of the central nervous system that control the somatic reflex. The second one, which is the visceral reflex, is actually an autonomic reflex, okay, and it occurs in the soft tissue organ of the body. Okay, basically it involves the reflex actions of internal organs such as heart, okay, reproductive organs, and digestive system. And the autonomic nervous system is the one that is responsible for these visceral reflexes. Okay, next one is the complexity of the circuit. So we can also classify the reflex based on the complexity. So there are two types. One is the monosynaptic reflex, and the second one is the polysynaptic reflex. So the monosynaptic reflexes, okay, is the most simplest reflex arc. Okay, it has only one synapse, and the example of the monosynaptic reflex is the patellar reflex, also known as the knee jerk reflex. We're going to take a look on that example after this. And then the next one is the polysynaptic reflexes, and this one is much more complicated, and it must have at least one interneuron between the sensory neuron and also the motor neuron. So the example of the polysynaptic reflexes is including like the pupillary light reflex. So we're going to talk about these reflexes in the third video. Okay, the final classification is based on the side of the information processing. So we have two classifications. One is the spinal reflex and another one is the cranial reflex. So in the spinal reflex, the information is being processed in the spinal cord. Hence, it got its name spinal reflex. And for the cranial reflex, the reflexes being processed in the brain. So that's the difference between the two reflexes. Okay. Now we're going to see the stretch reflex. So stretch reflex is an example of a monosynaptic reflex. So stretch reflex helps our nervous system to smoothly coordinate the activity of the skeletal muscle. So this picture showing you the anatomy of the muscle spindle and also the tendon organ. Okay, the muscle spindle measure the amount of stretch in the muscle. So here you can see that the muscle spindle is actually embedded within the larger skeletal muscle known as the extrafusal muscle fibers. So within the muscle spindle, we can see there is the intrafusal muscle fibers. And the intrafusal muscle fibers is surrounded by the sensory nerve ending, which is coiling around the intrafusal muscle fibers. And this nerve ending is important to sense the degree of the stretch muscles. And then the tendon organ must constantly inform the brain about the states of the muscle. So the Golgi tendon organ is the sense organ. Okay, it's known as the sense organ because it tells how much the tensions that the muscle is exerting. Now let's see a video on how the muscle spindle works.
Proprioception is imperative in the body's ability to retain balance and posture without conscious effort. In order for the human body to orient itself in space, special sensory receptors called muscle spindles are embedded in the belly of skeletal muscle. These receptors detect changes in length and velocity of stretch. Typical muscle spindles consist of 3 types of intrafusal muscle fibers surrounded by a connective tissue sheath. These include 1 dynamic nuclear bag fiber, 1 static nuclear bag fiber, and around 5 nuclear chain fibers. As action potentials reach the muscle via alpha motor neurons, the surrounding extrafusal fibers contract or relax, stretching the muscle spindle along with them. Sensory information on the velocity of this stretch and muscle length is transmitted via afferent sensory neurons. These signals are transmitted to the central nervous system and modulated by efferent gamma motor neurons that regulate the contraction of the muscle spindle fibers. This coactivation of muscle fibers allows the body to sense and maintain its position in space. Without it, balance becomes a near impossible task.
So let's see the steps in the patellar reflex. So the patellar reflex is one of the well-known example of the monosynaptic reflex. Okay, so in the first step, it requires stimulations of a receptor. So when a doctor tap your patellar ligament using a reflex hammer, so the stretch receptor in the quadriceps femoris are being stretched. Okay, and then the distortions of the receptor then stimulate the sensory neurons that extend into the spinal cord, which is the integration center. So when the information arrive here, okay, it's being processed, and if the stimulation is sufficient enough, this will then activate a motor neuron. So once the motor neuron is being activated, okay, an action potential is propagated to the effector, which is the quadriceps femoris. Okay, what happened in the final step? Okay, the stimulations of the skeletal muscle fibers cause the contractions of the stretch muscle that extends the knee in a brief kick. Okay, now let's see a video on how patellar reflex assessment is being done.
Okay, to check the patellar reflex, this is going to be looking at L2 to L4. And to find the tendon, what you want to do is locate the kneecap and then go just a little bit right below it. And the best way is to have the patient extend the leg out, and then that tendon will pop out, and that is where you're going to go. Okay, after locating the tendon, put your hand behind the knee just to support it. Have them relax, and the tendon's right here. And what you're going to do is you're just going to tap briskly, and what we're looking for is this lower leg to extend outward. So here we go. And we got a response there, and one more time. And got a really good response there.
So that's it for the second part of the lecture. I'm going to see you in the next video on the polysynaptic reflexes. Thank you for watching.